Well, a very good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the last one of the day, it's session 13D. Hey, this is going to be really interesting. The title is Accelerating Digital Transformation. Now, we all want to do that, right? So here to tell us how to do that is with X Analytics is Justin Borgman. Now, Justin's going to be moderating the session. He has a couple of other folks that he'll introduce as well. But Justin himself, he is director in Starburst. So Justin, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate it. And as you mentioned, I'm Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst. Starburst is the company behind an open source project called Trino, formerly known as Presto, which allows you to run analytics everywhere. And we're going to talk a lot about that today with my friends here, Jonathan from Liberty Mutual, Karthik from CVS Health, and Srini from Hanover Insurance. We're going to explore the ways that X Analytics is driving digital transformation faster and touch on some of the reasons why we're seeing such an accelerated shift towards this concept of really analyzing data where it lives and embracing the decentralization that naturally occurs in enterprises. Coined by Gartner, the term X Analytics is essentially the ability to run analytics on all of your structured and unstructured data, no matter where it lives or in what format. And today, this capability is becoming more and more important. The pandemic in particular has altered customer and organizational behavior dramatically, forcing even faster digital transformations across many industries. X Analytics is delivering on the promise of the big data era by adding new revenue streams, removing barriers, and driving innovation at the world's leading organizations. So let's dive into some of the questions for today's panel. So my first question for you all is, how do each of you define this concept of X Analytics within your own organization? And what challenges, if any, have you faced while convincing your own organizations to kind of embrace this model? I don't know, who would like to start?
I can start.
Yeah, please, Srini.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Thanks, Derek, for this opportunity. So, X Analytics, right? As we were going through it, right? It's been a fairly new term, just about a year or so, right? So I think Gartner came up with this just around the pandemic time. So I think the way to look at it is, right? So we all have been probably doing X Analytics in one form or the other, for a long time, right? Be it in the enterprise BI world or more on the augmented analytics, self-service analytics with data democratization. So that's how I look at X Analytics, where we have come. So we have to go further along as we move the needle in terms of the X Analytics, right? Now, can users and analysts can go to a single platform, a logical layer, and do analytics, kind of productize the data. So I think that even during the pandemic, right, the importance of data, importance of various data, right, structured, unstructured, video, social media, and going through tons of text notes from the research papers, scientists' articles, news sources, and so on. So I think that is where the power of X Analytics with AI and ML has come along. And I would still like to see, right, organizations like ourselves, to really move forward and go down the path of this X Analytics and have that universe layer of data access to all the business users.
Yeah, thanks, Srini. I definitely agree with all of that. I think in simple terms, for us, it's really about full data availability and having access to the full spectrum. And I think the biggest new aspect here is the unstructured data, right? Which we all know is 85, 90% or more of the actual data in a lot of enterprises. I think although we haven't been referring to it as X Analytics, the concept of running analytics on all of our data, structured data has been there for quite a while, and we've been exploring a variety of techniques to do that. But on the unstructured side, right, that's the new frontier. And I think the biggest challenge for us, because that unstructured data has historically required so much manual activity to extract it, right? There's a lot of data enters the organization in paper form or in, you know, what we call digital paper. It's still bound in some form of a document. The extraction of that requires some kind of AI or NLP or computer vision, right? And it's really the trust of that AI that is the biggest hurdle, I think, for companies when you've been relying on a certain set of data where humans have been involved to say, no, we have the AI that's now extracting that for us. Trust the data. I think that's still, you know, another frontier that we got to get through.
I think like those are great points, right? Like, so to add on to that, like the way I see this is like much more simplistic, and like what Srini and like John called out, like this is a concept that has existed for a long time. In the past, the way we've been doing this is, we kind of go and harvest information or data from like different systems, put it together and do it ourselves. But this concept of X analytics, in my opinion, at least has like two purposes. One is quick realization of value, especially if you're doing cross-platform or cross data store analysis. So a good example was, we have, CVS, we have data sitting in like multiple platforms. And if you want to quickly realize value on like, do a test on, is it even worth, embarking in a certain journey? I think a platform like X Analytics, a tool like X Analytics is going to be critical for us to get to that value realization very quickly. And then the second thing is that every organization goes through this this big migration around, either it could be platform migration, platform consolidation, organizational mergers, and things like that. So during that process, like one of the key things we struggle is that doing a comparison between like different platforms or different data stores. I think putting a tool like X Analytics is going to enable acceleration of migrations as well. So those are the two perspectives that I want to add to like what Srini and John brought.
Yeah, that's great, Karthik. I appreciate that. I'm curious. A follow-up question on this. X analytics is a Gartner term. It's a term that they created and that they've popularized. But there's another term that is gaining popularity, which is data mesh. And and I'm curious. You all's thoughts, are these synonyms? Compare and contrast. What are your thoughts on data mesh? And Karthik, if you'd like to continue, please feel free.
I think the concepts are the same, except that in the past where you've tried to virtualize data, it's been a struggle, right? The concept of data mesh depends a lot on like virtualization of data. And everybody who's done that on like large ecosystems have struggled a lot. There's a lot of challenges doing that. I think that's where X Analytics is kind of like a differentiator, in my opinion, is that you are doing analytics without impacting the systems across the board, right? Like you are transferring the compute back into that X Analytics area, rather than passing it down to those individual data stores or data platforms. I think that's the biggest difference, is in my opinion.
John?
I think that what Karthik's point is right on, as far as the differentiation on the technology aspect of the concept. To me, though, the other differentiators for mesh, which I believe is a much broader concept, which includes culture and the people aspect and in the process side of it as well. So if you think of people, process, and technology as the three main aspects of some of these bigger concepts, the mesh brings in the aspects of creating more data products versus data as a traditional asset, and then trying to federate your data into more subject area domains to create more autonomy and ownership within the individual functions within a company versus a data organization all having to be a centralized organization, which traditionally can create bottlenecks. So I think that's one of the big things with the mesh concept.
Yeah. So to me, right, like having been in this world of data for over 20 years, right, like, so we've all tried to create that, the single version of truth of a data product, right, like a data repository of sort, really like, okay, let's make all the data come to one place and now give access to that data to all the users. So that didn't work. Like, I'm sure like all of us agree to that. So where this X analytics data mesh, AKA data fabric, is taking us all to the path of this analogy that I would like to tell all the time is, right, like the chipmunk and acorns. So chipmunks gather acorns and then like at times like leave it in like many trees, but during the winter or before hibernation, like they know where to go get it. So I would like to see that's how like the data mesh is evolving, right? Like, hey, leave the data where it is. Don't bother bringing it into one place, be it a enterprise data warehouse or a lake or now lake house. Leave the data where it is, but provide that data architecture, X analytics, mesh, fabric, structured, unstructured data, so that like users can go shop for data and productize the data.
Yep, that's great. I'm going to remember that chipmunks and acorns analogy. I'll use that in the future. Consistent with this idea of leaving the data where it is, I would love to add to the dimension cloud and perhaps hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. Curious where each of your organizations are in that journey. Is it still kind of move everything to the cloud? Is it hybrid, and where multi-cloud factors into that as well?
Yeah, I can start here. Like, we are taking a cloud first approach very diligently. In fact, like 5-6 years ago, when I had just joined Hanover organization, like I had actually started putting business intelligence and analytics on the cloud. So we've been like now very successful with it, and taking cloud first approach on all the architecture, like not just for the reporting analytics and data science. Like we've got tons of, we have got smaller lakes and a larger data lake running on the cloud, but even on the core insurance products like that are starting to run on the cloud for us. So we are not shy with cloud. Like, so we have vetted proper security, all the core security policies of a cloud provider with our CISO and then security organization. We have a security council that meets regularly to understand data that is in the cloud, like what goes in, what can go in or not. So cloud is like a very friendly approach for us.
Yeah, very, very similar at Liberty Mutual. It's definitely cloud first. I mean, we've been in a hybrid mode for quite a while, right? You gotta be there at some point as you migrate, because we've got 3 data centers. You don't move to the cloud in one fell swoop, right? It's a incremental migration, but it's cloud first for anything possible as we're migrating our workload. And it's really less about cost, right? Because that's always been a thing. Are we doing this to save money? Yeah, that's certainly one aspect that you consider. But for us, it's really about speed. It's about speed and agility, and then providing a tool set in a native environment that attracts the best talent. And then, ultimately, we want everything to be serverless, right? So that we're only paying for what we use, and then we can drive the right behaviors internally.
Great point.
I agree. Like, at CVS, we are multi-cloud as well. There are all 3 clouds like AWS, GCP, and Azure. We have we're pretty mature environment. We're driving like lots of value around these things. And further to that, right, we've also established patterns in which people consume data, depending on, you have a high volume in a high compute problem, you have a simple aggregation problem, you have like a embedded analytics problem. So we have established also like different patterns in which we have set up methodologies across these different clouds. And that's again another reason why I'm very interested in this topic is this. As people get into this cloud journey, right? They build these mature ecosystems. In the past, like where you have to go through like a waterfall methodology to like develop data products. Now it's accelerated by like cloud journey. Like all these data products are getting created on a much more regular fashion, like much more faster and agile pace. So that means that it's more data, more insights, and people want to access this data and insights across the board, right? Like somebody who's on Google, somebody who's on Azure wants to like cross-pollinate the data to see like what's going on the other side. So I think definitely this all like our journey into hybrid is all ties back to this concept of X analytics.
Yeah, that's great. That's great perspective, Karthik. I appreciate that. I'm going to start to weave in some questions from the audience. So if you have questions out there, feel free to submit them in the chat. They do show up on my end, and we'll start weaving those in here as we go. One question that came up was, how do you address data quality, particularly in this kind of decentralized, X analytics, paradigm? I'd love some of your perspectives on that. Maybe Srini, maybe if you want to start.
So it's a very broad term, right? Like, so data quality has to be addressed at the source, right? Like, so you get the right quality of data, you will be able to produce right insights. Yeah, having said that, right, like it's the garbage in, garbage out aspect of it here as well. So looking at data quality, right, like those traditional methods of data profiling and data quality no longer cut it, right? Like, so when we talk about X analytics and that broad set of going through from big data to small and wide data and looking at data across all spectrums, right? As I said, like how AI actually is enabling a lot of these X analytics possible in a meaningful way. That is where that is how data quality should also be handled. Like it's no more humanly possible to manage data quality in a traditional method, like how I myself like used to do 10 years, 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So we gotta have that embedded AI and ML to sift through all these like unstructured data and really come up with those data anomalies and patterns and address data quality right there.
I don't know, John or Karthik, if either of you.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think like.
Go ahead, Karthik.
Right. I was going to say, I'll make it very quick, short, right? Like, gone are the days when you have to be really precise about data quality, unless you are into like a use case that requires precision. At that point, you need to start invoking like tools like data quality, specific tools to address data quality issues. And even those areas, there are AI concepts of AI that you can build, that your rules for data quality doesn't have to be prescriptive. It can be more like predictive. And there are tools out there that can clearly point out quality issues around that. But again, going back to my original point, like the data quality seems to be, for example, if you are predominantly driving use cases that are like AI driven, I think these days machine learning models do allow for those variances where they can adjust for qualities. Like if your input signals are not as healthy, I don't think it matters for if you're running like predictive or prescriptive analytics. But again, I can keep going. I want to hear like John's perspective also on this.
Yeah, thanks, Karthik. I'll give you a couple very simple things that I think about with data quality. One is, if you were to ask, the data steward for any particular data subject, how do you know that you have data with quality? What would the answer be? And it's usually a very simple answer. And then you say, how are you measuring that, right? And what we try to do is keep it simple with data quality metrics, right? It's like anything. You could be, in a business operation where you've got, 50 KPIs that you're trying to measure against or certain metrics, and it's like over engineering it, right? And there's usually like 5 that really tell you the whole story. So we do the same thing. What are those key pieces of data that just have to be right? How do you know they're right? What are you doing to measure them? And then just creating visibility. So, just basic dashboards. The other thing I'd say, aligned with some of my colleagues here, is that there's more eyes on the data than ever before. We've got, more people doing data science activities and various analytics. So they're the ones bumping into anything, on a regular basis. The key is, can they trace it back to where did that data originate and who's the data owner? Because if they can do that, then you can create a very simple feedback loop that when they're bumping into it, they know who to contact and start to address the issue. That all starts with having a good data catalog with good data lineage, so that you know where is the origination point and who's the owner.
Yep, absolutely. Well put. I'll ask another question that is very common, and I see it here from the audience as well, which is around security and governance in this model. So how do you provide, fast access and the right level of access controls when you're thinking in this manner? If we have a volunteer here who'd like to start with that one.
I'll start that one. And our primary approach to this is trying to create a single point of access, where we can manage the access controls. Where it gets difficult is when you've got proliferation across numerous environments with data from all different points and different environments, different data stores, different workspaces, etc. Gets super challenging. So what we try to do is create one single point of entry where I can search and discover what data is available. You can see at that point in time what you have access to. And if your entitlements don't allow access, how can you request access? And then a simple way to get approval if you have the right need. And then any provisioning of data that needs to happen is all based on that single interface. That, what I think, is the simplest way to manage it.
Yeah, the way I look at it is, right, like Justin, in terms of security and governance, right, like this is where the data mesh comes into play very well, right? Like, so to have a successful data governance, you've got to have a very foundational data asset catalog. And the entire mesh data fabric architecture is driven off of that data asset catalog, right? And really like bringing a tool to do that data mesh architecture, that logical data access layer, which has to handle like masking, encryption, fine-grained access control, and also provide query auditing, like who's accessing what data sources. Like, again, going back to that ACON methodology, right? Like you're grabbing the ACON, that means like, is that your ACON that you are entitled to, right? So the agility, security, and productivity is increased for data engineers, analysts, and business analysts in this case, right? Like when you build that mesh and fabric architecture.
Very good. I don't know
much to add.
Yeah, please.
I don't have much.
Okay.
I guess
it's 5 o'clock.
I think maybe Siri was jumping in with her own opinion there. Excellent. No, that's great. I want to take this maybe one step further and talk about, I'm curious if some of your businesses are global. I think when we were preparing for this session, I know at least one of you is very global in terms of how you deal with data. And I'm curious about, GDPR and other data privacy regulations and what role that plays. The necessity to essentially keep data where it was created, right? Switzerland data needs to stay in Switzerland, German data needs to stay in Germany. Is that perhaps driving even more of a need for a data mesh or X analytics approach because you can't co-locate all of that data in one place?
Yeah, Justin, I can certainly answer that. And yeah, we're a global company. Definitely need to be very aware of all the local and country regulations and data residency requirements and so forth. And yeah, I mean that has created a lot of constraints in terms of certain groups that are in different parts of the world, in home office locations that are in different countries. How do we get them the data they need and and access without necessarily physically moving data, and all those aspects. So we definitely bake that into our data strategy, into our sort of our data lake federated model. So we got the various instances we need in the various locations. And then also trying to create techniques for oftentimes the data that is sensitive, personal identifiable information type stuff, isn't necessarily needed at the individual level, right? So how can we aggregate data to a level that de-identifies individuals, but we still get the business value from it? And then some other techniques, such as obfuscation or anonymization, where we can actually remove the risk of data proliferation by doing that, but still retaining the integrity of the data for various analytics purposes, right? And we refer to it internally as the data paradox here, right? It's never have we had such a great need for data, for AI, and for various analytics, and never have we had higher expectations in those regulatory requirements to meet for data privacy and other concerns, right? So what you're referring to. Yeah. So coming up with these techniques such that we can still provide access to the data without actually, increasing our risk and the ability to meet these regulations. So it's definitely a work in progress. The bar is rising every day, but those are some of the things that we're thinking about.
Yeah, to add to John's point, right? Like Justin, it's not just GDPR, right? Like we now have very strict CCPA.
You're right. You're right.
So CCPA has become stricter day by day, and like I've seen it. Like, but interestingly, right? Like I know, like John can probably second me on that. Like insurance companies, to most extent, are getting some kind of like a free pass on that, right? Like, though, yeah, we still have to go through certain CCPA regulations, but insurance regulations kind of like what CCPA authorities, like at one point when I was reading some of their policies, said that, like if you are insurance and if you already have a regulation on insurance, right, like because we are a heavily regulated business, then regarding like customer PII, like, so that will hold true. You don't have to really like go through CCPA that vigorously. So I don't know, John, do you remember seeing that? So that's like,
yeah, I know what you're referring to, and certainly, there's the stipulations around data that's needed for your business operations, right, which can get a bit caught up in interpretation, and then what rules are set, and legal aspects around how long you need to retain data, right, which gets into some of the complications. But I think the key is what kind of a records retention program do you have? What are your policies around records retention, and how do you manage that as a program, and then automate as much as possible, right? So that the manual burden isn't totally suffocating your organization.
I mean, from my point of view, CCPA, absolutely, we got to be compliant, and we do a lot of work on that area. But I want to throw this question back to you, Justin. Like, as per GDPR, going back, right? Like, everybody talks about, data being located locally to that region, right? With the X analytics, there is this gray area of transient data. So how does X analytics kind of think about data is still going to be addressed locally located? Like, how is this going to be in transition? That's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. I can tell you certainly, at least the way we do it with our customers, at Starburst, we're a query engine. We are essentially memory and compute, so we don't actually store data. We're like a database without storage. That's a simple way to think about our technology. And that allows us to essentially, for global organizations, to push the processing to where the data is, and therefore do that analysis within that geography. So for example, if you have data in Switzerland and you have data in the US, and it's a US analyst who's trying to understand some aggregate about Switzerland, you could push the processing to your Switzerland Starburst cluster, and then only pull back, let's say, the aggregated results, which are compliant if they're not personally identifiable, and you complete your analysis that way. So the sort of data privacy data, the data that has to be governed by those regulations never actually leaves the geography. And that's sort of how we try to work with our customers around that topic. But it's a challenge one, and I think it's only going to increase. I mean, I appreciate both you and Srini both reminding me of course, the regulations in California and how we're no different anymore. It used to be that EMEA was leading the way on data privacy, but we're catching up here in the US as well. And this is becoming a challenge for many, many different organizations to think about and have to wrestle with as they design their architectures. And it seems like, that's certainly not going to get easier here as we go. Another question that we had here from the audience was this question of who manages the larger ontology and across data domains in a data mesh model. So in a data mesh, you've got your sort of domain specific, owners who are creating these data products. Is there someone in the organization who sort of manages that larger ontology across all these different data domains? And how do you think about that? And maybe as an aside, I'd be curious kind of where you all are in those respective journeys, because I think one thing I would stress for our audience is data mesh is not a thing that you just flip a switch and now you've got data mesh. It's a journey, and people are at various stages in that. So would love any of your perspectives on that question.
That's the data asset catalog being meant, that ontology is referring to, right? Like that's the taxonomy of all the metadata and assets. As I said, without that solid foundational data asset catalog with metadata, definitions, glossary, there is no data mesh. And who manages? In our example, like I've been building that asset catalog now for 3 years. It's now part of the data governance team. The data stewards and data owners own the data asset catalog, and then they build on it day-to-day basis.
I agree. I think it fits squarely within the chief data officer's organization, in my opinion. And I think you got to think about it more like a hub and spoke model, where the hub controls how what to capture, how to capture the ontology, and just put some governance rules around it, and the spokes control the actual filling out the details of the ontology. So I think it has to be an ecosystem that works together, and it has to be tightly controlled centrally by a chief data officer's organization.
Yep, I would concur with Karthik and Srini as well. Going to a mesh and distributing those data domains does not remove the need for some central governance, right? It's just ideally, lighter weight and more focused on those cross-domain types of aspects, right? So think of a good federal system, right, where you've got your states and your federal centralized group that still needs to manage that. And as far as where folks are in the evolution, I mean, this is a new, still very new emerging concept out there.
Yep.
I've talked to a number of firms and third parties on this, and nobody seems to be like the absolute light pole out there to look to. Everybody's still kind of in a learning journey here, and we are as well. We're in exploratory mode, looking at various aspects of this, starting with the people process side, right? Like, how can we instill more data domain ownership, true understanding of how data in various domains is used for analytics, having that awareness, starting to really manage things with that ML product management mindset, right? It's an end-to-end product management discipline, and creating more of that culture internally. And then over time, you can start to look at the opportunities, right, to actually execute on some of the physical aspects of building data domains. But it's not something you do like at the flip of a switch. It'd be a multi-year journey, and you want to start small and execute on certain use cases first.
That's great. That's well said. So we have just a couple minutes left here in this session. I always like to end these sessions by asking each member of the panel, what is one key takeaway that you have from this session? If you want the audience to sort of just have one thought that they stick with. And while you're thinking of that, I'll just mention a little bit of data that we had in a survey we did with Red Hat. We surveyed the market and found that more and more enterprises believe that this notion of data being in multiple disparate systems will actually only continue. And in fact, 54% of respondents said that they have more than 5 platforms today, and continue to have continue to have more than 5 platforms going forward with respect to where their data is located. So I think that just speaks to the notion of X analytics being an incredibly important part of your strategy, that consolidation in the enterprise data warehouse of old is not likely a solution going forward for the future. So with that, I will maybe turn to who would like to go first with their one takeaway. Srini, I'm just going to pick you because you're first on my screen.
So to me, I would like to emphasize like what I've learned from this session and researching on X analytics even before this, right? Like, so X analytics is not a project, it's a journey. So like John said, right, like, so start small, plan for it, like whether it's a 3-year, 5-year and goes on. Same like what I tell all the business stakeholders in the past, and continue to do that, right? Like data governance is not a project, right? Like data governance is a journey. So likewise, X analytics, the data mesh architecture, data fabric architecture, it's a journey.
Awesome. Karthik, maybe if you want to go next.
Sure. I think I'm kind of excited about X analytics. The reason is that I think the next step in innovation for X analytics is taking those insights that you gather from across the board and turning them into actionable data products. And it's very interesting to see where this goes in terms of next steps.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest takeaway is really just acknowledging that the complexity of data being distributed on a number of platforms, and the fact that there's just going to be more and more new data sources, all that's not going away, right? So I'd say let's not be thinking that we're going to ever get to one data platform supporting an enterprise. It's going to be distributed, it's going to be federated, and we got to start thinking about how we best operate on that distribution and use good techniques with our data governance, our data catalogs, our lineage, et cetera, to really understand what data we have, where it is, who owns it, because that's much more valuable. And all of this is a journey. So you use a use case model where each use case drives its own business value, So because investment in this space, is hard because, this stuff takes time. The best way to, encourage investment and reinvestment is to use a use case, show value, and then, continue to build on the foundation with each use case.
That is excellent advice. Always good advice. Derek, I'm going to turn it back to you right on time.
Perfect. Hey, Justin, thank you very much. Nice session. Srini, John, Karthik, thank you for your participation. I think we've certainly, imparted some gems for the audience to go take away, think about. And hey, if there are any people out there who want to ask further questions about it, feel free to throw it into the session chat or in the various communities. I'm sure that Justin and his team are going to be scanning that as well to reply and to continue the discussion. So thanks again, and we'll see everyone tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you all. Take care.